Good evening. My name is Vikas Pota, and welcome to this T4 live stream from a sunny London. As you can see, it's not raining for once, and we are enjoying the glorious sunshine this evening. I use this opportunity to present some friends of mine, and so far we've had some very lively discussions that provide perspective to those that are watching. You know, I've been very fortunate through my career of meeting with exceptional leaders and change makers. And when I often speak about them, the people that I'm speaking to often say, I wish I had that opportunity. And today I'm really delighted to bring in front of you someone who I consider a friend, but someone who has been exceptional in the way that he has led from the front, been passionate about the teaching cause in particular, and education in general. Please welcome Sharath Jeevan, the founder and CEO of STIR Education, which is an NGO in London that does work in Africa and India. Sharath, welcome to this live stream.
Thanks, Vikas. So good to be here. And I was just saying, doesn't feel, it was 9 years ago that I first came over to get your advice on the whole concept behind STIR. So time has flown, and yeah, we've made such a lot of progress. I'm very proud to be here.
Well, you know, I think a lot of people can have ideas, and you know, we have those a dozen a day. But the people that can actually turn some ideas into real living organizations with such great impact deserve all the credit, and you are definitely one of those. What I want to do, Sharath, is in this conversation, I want to have two halves. One is to talk about the organization STIR, STIR Education, and your great work and what really drives it. And secondly, I want to talk about you in your personal and professional capacity as to how you built STIR, and we'll speak about that in due course. But I think that'll be interesting for those that are watching for sure. So, Sharath, 9 years ago, we met, like you said. It wasn't my idea, that's for sure, but you just came for some ideas and to share. Tell me what STIR Education is. I should also tell you that this live stream on the Facebook page and the Facebook group is predominantly watched by teachers and school leaders around the world. On Twitter, you know, there's an amalgam of people. On LinkedIn, our friends who are more than just education. And obviously this will live on YouTube as well. And so explain to everyone in a very general sense why you set up STIR Education.
Thanks, Vikas. So really the world we live in, if we haven't been persuaded of this, then nothing will, I guess. But we live in a world of unknown unknowns, to borrow that some unfortunate phrasing from a famous American a few years ago. And the real reason STIR exists is to help our young people prepare and flourish in that world of unknown unknowns. Right now, schooling doesn't do that enough. It focuses on important things, literacy, numeracy, of course they're important, but how we nurture the foundations of lifelong learning, as we call them, or as some people say, how do we help young people learn to learn so they can focus on that world of unknown unknowns? That's really the core reason we're here. And I could talk about why, how we do that, but that's really at the core, the essence of what STIR is trying to do.
Don't you think that's a bit fluffy?
Yeah, so I think it was one of these things that often, I think often in education we've been often under huge pressure to show hard targets, things that, because literacy and numeracy, these things they're important, but they're also easier to measure. But I think there's so much evidence now around the world in developed and developing countries that shows that some of these so-called soft skills, things like engagement, safety, curiosity, critical thinking, self-confidence, they're critical for life success, but also for academic success as well. And I think that's the thing we're not focusing enough on in our sphere. And I think what we've been able to do over the last 9 years at STIR is find a way to achieve that, not by directly working with children, because often that can be expensive, it may not be sustainable, but actually nudging systems in a more positive direction through relationships, through role modeling, so those attributes, those foundations of lifelong learning happen really at every level in an education system.
So you talk about not working directly with children, and obviously we know, and I know that you work with teachers. Tell us about your work to date with teachers.
So very proud to have about 200,000 teachers in India and Africa, but also now in Indonesia, because as well now, part of these networks, we run about 8,000 teacher meetings or networks every month. They have been traditionally been, of course, physical. Of course, with COVID, we've been able to be agile, and more of them are happening in a blended way or virtually. And they're really key to driving the intrinsic motivation of teachers, the inner drive, the sense teachers want to be great professionals. But in doing so, really encouraging them to role model those elements of engagement, critical thinking, curiosity, so that the classrooms change and kids have a more engaging experience in what they do every day.
And so give us some more practical examples. So you have these networks of teachers in these three countries, and role modeling is quite an important part of what you do. Tell me a little bit more in terms of, has the approach been working? What have you learned? Where have you seen impact?
So I think the core insight is that there's got to be real alignment and coherence in a system with us. And so there's no point, a child being told to do something if the teacher that they deal with day in, day out is not role modeling the same thing. It's no point, though, the teacher trying that if the official who supports them in the district is also not on the same page and role modeling the whole piece. So it's all about relationships and role modeling. We haven't focused on that human part of the equation enough, in my view, in education. We want to be able to prove that link, and we're running a really exciting longitudinal study across several districts in India and Uganda. And we're early into that process, but the data so far is showing some very promising signs that role modeling is really happening, and teachers are changing their behavior. Kids are seeing better classrooms, and officials are spreading that leadership as well.
And so you talk about a longitudinal study taking place in Uganda, but for the last 9 years, your body of work, what does it show you?
So I think it shows us that really at the core that teachers can fall back in love with teaching, kids can fall back in love with learning, and education systems can fall back in love with their teachers. And like you, I'm Indian in background, and I believe you can fall in love after getting married, Vikas. So it may not be the first choice job of a professional, but we can help people fall back in love with what they do in the world of work, and teaching is a great example of that.
Great answer. Thank you so much, Sharath. Now, what have you been seeing during this pandemic? I've been asking, obviously, everyone that I've been speaking to on these live streams as to their observations and what their one lesson that they've learned is. I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, so there's kind of our team has been looking at the experience of past pandemics, and I think what's really interesting when we look at that historical perspective is that we both need to take a short-term view. How do we, cope with the current crisis and the significant strain that many people in our systems, teachers and kids are facing now? But also, how do we get through the portal, if you like, the other side of the door? And I think it's really important to have both perspectives in there. I think we have been a bit guilty of a sector of rushing in. Of course, there's an immediate emergency we have to deal with. Kids are out of school. Of course, it's critical. But we've got to remember the world will come back to normal, we hope in a few months. But how do we make sure we keep the resilience of a system, the motivation of a system intact at all these levels so we can rebound? And what's been exciting, I think, for us is that we were always very focused on the physical domain of meetings and peer networks at the level of the teachers and officials, but increasingly believe that a blended approach might be quite powerful, and actually using technology not to replace human relationships, but to actually supplement them and make them richer. So I think this kind of build better, this blended approach might offer a new avenue of impact and learning from this.
Great, thank you, Sharath. Sharath, you have been, you get different types of leaders, you get different types of expertise in terms of how you build organizations. You've been very much, if I'm not mistaken, and please correct me, very much a startup guy, where you've had this idea, you've given birth to it, you raise it to its, at least in its 5-10 years, and then you recognize the need to do other things and hand over leadership. And you're going through a similar process right now with Stir. But before we get to your decision making in terms of why you decided that this is the time to step off, tell us about you as an NGO leader in the world today, someone who a lot of people have a lot of love for. What are the lessons you've learned in leadership over this period?
Yeah, great question, Rikas. And I think the key lesson is that I think there's been 9 years, it says, so I'm quite proud that I've lasted this long, if you like, as well. It's as I said, I'm a startup guy, so it's a bit of a stretch already. But I think one of the things that I've really come away with, my big lesson, and maybe my advice for other social entrepreneurs who are going on this journey earlier on, if you can have that alignment in your life and your organization where you're bringing everyone on the same page, your team, your donors, your board, the governments you work with, our teachers and other beneficiaries, life is so much easier. And I think one of the best times of Stir, it's when all those things have been able to create a vision that has brought everyone along. Our friends and advisors like yourself, and everyone's bought in and working on the same way. When things have gone wrong, and there have been many things that have gone wrong over the years, it's when those things have not been in full harmony. So how do you align the purpose of what we do, the motivation of what we do, with all the people that as a social entrepreneur you have to deal with and work with? That's, I think, the biggest skill of being a social entrepreneur. I've done it well at times, and I've done it pretty badly at other times. And I think that's probably my big, in a sense, my big reflection on these last few years.
So tell us, in terms of, just drill a little bit deeper into that. If you had to say, develop these three kind of skills or competencies as a social entrepreneur, or an NGO leader, or even beyond the sector, if you're a teacher, what would you say those two or three things are?
I think the question, I think what I've always asked myself is, how have I helped through the work I do? And everything I do is through the organization and the people we've got and our teams and partners. But how have we helped take the world to a place it wouldn't have got to otherwise, right? I think if we just ask that really simple question, it's incredibly simple, but too often I think it's scary to ask it. What can we do unique that no one else can do? How do you really focus on that? And if there are great people doing reading programs, there are many that we know that some great work on numeracy, there is no point being yet another person, group doing that and duplicate. That really different, that niche that you can occupy, that really adds value for the whole sector. And our belief was that if you think of motivation as soil, if that soil in a system can be fertile, all the other things we plant, curriculum, assessment, reading, etc., that can grow taller and faster. So I think it's always been about thinking, how can we stay unique and try to do something different, and genuinely adds value there as well.
And so, it's really interesting. You talk about doing things unique, but what happens when you're not understood?
So that's one of the biggest challenges as a leader. I think I've succeeded and failed by that simple yardstick. Because so when I've been able to set a vision that everyone has bought into, and that you've also to talk and persuade people. I said that alignment is there, and then magical things happen. I think early on, I probably wasn't as confident as I could have been as a leader, and I sometimes succumbed because I thought this person is older, wiser than me, and they know more than than I do on this. So therefore, let me just go with it. And it's not that I had the answers at all, but I think I had a conviction, and sometimes I didn't express that conviction as strongly as I could have done. And that's my big regret, I think, looking back at these 9 years. I wish I'd pushed back a bit earlier. There's huge pressure in our sector to make everything measurable. But many things we know that are critical are about human relationships. And we've now started to find rigorous ways to measure that stuff. But it took a while, obviously. But I wish I'd maybe held my ground a bit more strongly in the early days, and maybe stop some of that kind of incoherence or misalignment happening, perhaps. So yeah, that was just one of those painful lessons of a startup.
So your model is that as a social enterprise or as a NGO, you depend upon donations from a range of actors out there. What advice, and not wanting to trip you up in any way or share any of the secrets or the magic sauce, how do you raise money? Because you've been very successful in that regard. I'm sure people want to know, well, what is the recipe?
So I think, first of all, there are no secrets, and I openly talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and whatever I've learned, both things that have worked and not, of course, happy to share. But I think it's more that I think being authentic and really being passionate about the vision you're trying to build, and I think giving the person who's supporting you. We're very lucky with we have amazing partners from the MasterCard Foundation to bilateral donors to private family foundations as well. But giving them a sense of how they're going to help you get to that new place, the sense they're adding and being part of that journey. Often I think we treat funders as kind of almost like in a transactional way. And I'm here, I'm going to get the check or not get the check. It is about a relationship and building something truly together where both sides are adding something very unique in this equation.
And what's the best way to meet funders?
So I still think I know Zoom and so on has opened up. I use LinkedIn now a lot, but I do think that the human connection is really important. The first funder for Stir, I spent 2 hours wandering around a museum in Qatar, actually. And we just started talking as we were looking at art exhibits. And it was the MasterCard Foundation, one of the first foundations. They never funded an organization as young as Stir. We'll rarely do that. But I think just that ability to spend time and talk about things and have these softer moments, I think, helps a lot. So I think once the world can go out to travel, I do think that human bond does make a big difference. This is really about a personal relationship that you're building, especially early on.
Sharath, in terms of governance, how do you do governance well?
So I think a really important part is being open and honest with our board. I've got a great relationship with the chair of our board, but our whole board, and they're very honest, very open. It's very much roll up your sleeves and no BS in what we do. And so we've had some very tough moments. We had a fraud in Uganda where our own accounting firm defrauded us of money, for example, and I had to go to our board and say, and it wasn't picked up by auditors, all this stuff. So, but I think what's really important in those moments is, as a leader, to be super honest, super transparent, tell people immediately. And in fact, these kind of occasions, they actually build confidence long term rather than reduce it if you can handle it openly and transparently. So that idea of just being very honest with the board, I think, helps so much.
And so now you're at this point where you're obviously thinking about succession. In your personal journey, like I said, you're a startup guy. You've done a great job. 9 years is probably too long for you anyway. But how should an organization prepare for that transition? And what is it that you're doing?
Yeah, so I mean, as we speak, because we're interviewing some candidates for my successor, I'm really excited. I spoke to one of them today. I'm going to move on. I really think it's important for the new person to have full autonomy and make this their baby. And they're going to be interviewed by the board and also by our executive team. That's very, very important that that's part of the process. And I think, there's no kind of, there was no fixed date. I didn't have a date in mind or any of this kind of stuff. But I always felt like there was going to be a point where the organization, honestly, it outgrows me. And I kind of felt at the end of last year, we were getting to some of those points where, especially internally, I get a lot of energy from the external environment, from partnerships, from some of the external policy developments, etc. But I think we reached 200,000 teachers, 35,000 schools now. At this level of scale, we need a more mature leadership style for the next chapter. And I could definitely feel a few of these things bubble up. And I had to ask myself, honestly, either I had to really develop parts of my own leadership style that were not traditional strengths, and was it the energy and the excitement about that, or is it better to say, look, it's time to? I'm very proud of where we've got to. Can a new person take the next chapter on? And it takes a while. I had about 3 months of discussions with our board, my chair. So all this stuff is very emotional, right? So baby you bring into the world, but I felt it was the right thing to do. And I think once you know that, it's important to follow through with it, I think, as well.
So what are you doing next, Sharath?
So what happened fairly randomly last year is I met a literary agent, Vikas, who was really excited about the work we were doing around reigniting the motivation of teachers. And we just started having discussions saying, is there stuff we can take from this that can help all the other domains of our lives, right? So all of us who are working, who are parents, who are spouses or partners, who are trying to nurture talent, who are citizens, how can we think about how we reignite our inner drive? So writing a book, it's coming out next year with Hachette. But what it sort of got me passionate about is, could we apply these ideas of motivation thinking to modern life? So I'm creating a lab that's trying to look at that and really share ideas of how we can make our lives more fulfilling and richer through that process of motivation.
Well, thanks a lot, Sharath. There's a couple of more questions that I have for you. So, we're partners in World Education Week. Can you tell me more about why you're so passionate about education and schools in particular?
So I think at a personal level, because I think I've only got to where I've got to. I went to, for example, to Cambridge for my undergraduate degree, only because I had a very stubborn teacher who almost forced me into the back of a car and made me, drove me up the M11 and waited outside admissions offices while I went to talk to tutors. I would never have applied. I didn't have the confidence to do that if he hadn't been so stubborn. So I'm a product of a great teacher. I think what I've been so privileged to do over the last 9 years is meet thousands of teachers on our visits and also talk to many, just the passion they have for their job. It's a difficult job, especially in a developing country. It's not a glamorous job. But I do think if we can help them make their jobs more fulfilling, more motivating, so many amazing things can happen. And they're such a critical agent of change in a young person's life, especially when that young person, often their parents, have not been to school in the first place. So to me, that human relationship, that's what it's really about. How can we reset that and really look at that relationship and think about how we can really nurture the next generation of our young people?
Sharath, there's a question from Monica Jagota from Delhi, I think. I've never seen a successful person pass on the baton so young. What makes you do that, Sharath?
I'm very flattered, Monica. I'm kind of hiding the gray hairs here, but I'm turning sort of 45 soon, in about a year or so. So not sure young is all relative, I think. But no, I think in our sector, we generally have been a bit guilty, let's be honest, of founder syndrome. And I think what happens is, as a social entrepreneur, you become very emotionally attached. The story is about as old as my first son. It is hard to let go, right? I mean, it's going to be a difficult few months emotionally as I let go in that regard. But I think we just have to say, what are we here for? Are we doing it for ourselves? Or are we doing it for our organizations and our mission? And I think the second has to come first, really, as well.
Well, Sharath, thank you so much. And one of the things that I wanted to, and there's a ticker tape that's going across the bottom of the screen, which I'd love for you to try to answer. It's a huge question, which is, what if 60 million children could be prepared for life in the modern world by 2025? Can you envision what a response to that could be?
So we're reaching 6 million children this year, Vikas, and we hope if our plans go, if things go to plan, we can reach that 60 million child number by 2025 in a few countries, in places like India, in Uganda, in Ethiopia, Brazil, Egypt. And I think one of the things that so excites me about that future is it is 60 million children. That's a huge difference in terms of the number of lives. But I think if we can do that, we can create that tipping point where we think about education differently. We really value the human equation that teachers bring to our classrooms. We think about the relationship with children. We think about how they relate to how governments operate and run education. And at the end of it, I think the core is the values of our education systems shift so that our kids really feel excited and wanting to learn and ready for this world that is so unpredictable, as we've seen. They don't just approach that with fear, they approach that with confidence and a real sense of optimism. And I think we've done that. We've kind of given the most precious gift we can give to any child in that process.
Sharath, thank you so much for participating in this T4 live stream. I know much of what you say resonates. When I reached out to you asking for your support for the last T4 conference, you came on board in the very instant. When we talked about World Education Week, you again threw your hat in the ring. And I'm very thankful. And some of the experience you talk about is exactly what the World Education Week is trying to showcase, which is just the most inspiring, set of things that are happening all over the world in our schools. And the effort is to try to stitch it together so that you can replicate what's happening in all these diverse places around the world to make sure that we can accelerate towards SDG 4. And it is partners like Stir Education and leaders like you that make it happen too, which I'm enormously grateful to you for. Sharath, thank you so much. And I know that you'll be back in your new capacity on this live stream as soon as you're up and running. But in the meantime, I wish you well, and please accept not just my thanks, but everyone else who's listening too. Thank you, and a very good evening.
Thanks, Vikas. Look forward